Trust the science. We're told to trust the science. Okay, let's trust the science here. Merck's COVID pill might pose risk for pregnant women. Some laboratory studies suggest that molnupiravir can insert errors in DNA, which could in theory harm a developing fetus, sperm cells, or children. A lot of people are looking for alternatives to the vaccine, or they're looking for some kind of therapeutic or treatment for COVID after people already get it. Now, of course, we're seeing the expansion of vaccine mandates across the board. And as these companies like Pfizer, Merck, or whoever start producing these pills to treat COVID, I have to wonder, what's the point of the vaccine mandates if there are alternative treatments? And I'm not talking about any of the ones that YouTube bans you for, although you should be allowed to talk about them. I'm talking specifically about major pharmaceuticals getting FDA approval to produce pills like molnupiravir. If there are treatments for COVID, shouldn't we just start relying on herd immunity, natural immunity, and these potential treatments and say, what's the point of the vaccine mandate? Now, up in New York, we have one of the most extreme vaccine mandates. Of course, you've probably heard the news. You've got to have 2 doses of the vaccine. Even children have to have at least, I believe, 1 dose of the vaccine. All private employees now need to have the full dose of the vaccine. And of course, the definition of a fully vaccinated is going to change. We've heard that from people like Fauci and from others at the CDC. Soon, booster will not be booster because the Daily Beast has already said, many experts are saying 3 shots is actually just regular vaccination. So we're inching towards 4. There's a tweet going around that I think explains what I want to get to with this segment and talking to you about Merck's pill causing mutations in sperm and fetuses. Let me show you this tweet just to kind of preface this segment so you can understand where we are at. Megan McArdle, verified Twitter user, she is a columnist at the Washington Post, tweeted, "Why do I encounter so many folks who tell me they refuse to get vaccinated because the vaccines are brand new and haven't been adequately tested? Besides, COVID is just the flu," she says, "then talk up equally novel monoclonal antibody treatments as a miracle cure for just the flu." Now, that is a bit of a straw man. I will tell you this, man. I think having gotten COVID, it was, in terms of my experience, twice or more worse than when I experienced the flu. And some people get mild symptoms from this, from COVID. Some people here got sniffles. You've heard me say it. I know. But for those that hadn't heard me talk about it, the worst illness I have ever had. I would not want to get it again. It was nightmarishly bad. I was delusional. I was walking around like fever, hallucinating. It was crazy. I couldn't eat. I didn't eat for 3 days. I couldn't sleep for days. I was messed up, pain all over my body. Would not recommend in any way. And that's why I think it's silly when people are like natural immunity, because I'm like, getting COVID as a prevention method for COVID is paradoxical and it makes no sense. Now, that being said, I'm not going to tell you what you should do, right? If you have natural immunity, like, I do, then I understand that we shouldn't have vaccine mandates. But this tweet here really exemplifies the issue that I see. First of all, people who advocates for monoclonal antibody treatment, I'll tell you this. I got monoclonal antibodies. It worked within, I think, 12 hours. The sickness broke and I was just like, I feel better. It was incredible. I honestly do still feel lingering effects. Not kidding. And it is, I'll put it this way. I feel like when I am physically active, I'm at 95%. I feel great. I feel mostly normal. And when I should say 99%, there's just like a feeling in my lungs. It doesn't prevent me from, skating. It's not impacting negatively. It just kind of feels like I know it happened. It's weird. It's like not pain or anything. It's hard to describe, but it feels like a lingering something of some sort. Now, I don't think COVID is just the flu. I think it's bad. I think it's really bad. You don't want to get it. We've had tons of people, guests on the show have said, yeah, it's really bad. Some have gotten it more than once. So why is it that some people might say monoclonal antibodies are good and they don't want to get vaccinated? The FDA insert for BioNTech's vaccine, for instance, says that they don't have sufficient information on the risk to women for pregnancy. They don't have sufficient information on long-term effects because those trials have only just begun. That's obvious. This is a new technology just released. And for that, there are a lot of people saying, I'd rather wait. Especially when you consider you've got companies coming out with alternative treatments like pills or monoclonal antibodies, which have been tested and used for a variety of illnesses going back several decades. And besides, even if you get, if you ignore that, there's just people's personal preference and advice from their doctors. Of course, this Meghan McArdle sort of set up a straw man. They're saying it's just the flu. So no. I don't think Joe Rogan's coming out saying it's just the flu. I mean, maybe he is. I don't know. I'm certainly not saying that. And I'm certainly saying monoclonal antibody treatment seemed to work for me. And I am not a proponent of ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine. In fact, I will stress this point as much as the media wants to lie to you about it. The first treatment I got was monoclonal antibodies, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, and a vitamin drip. Now, those last two things are basically like just vitamins. NAD is like a vitamin drip thing. Monoclonal antibodies was the initial immediate treatment that I received. 24 hours later, I was feeling better. I was feeling normal. I was up. I was spry. I was normal again. The pain was gone. And I didn't actually get the further treatment, the azithromycin and ivermectin. I didn't actually start that until about a day after. So I actually, as I've stated before, told the doctor, I don't think I need this. I mean, look, I'm feeling better. And that, no. Take your medicine. You have to do it. And I said, okay, I'll follow my doctor's orders, as I think you should as well. Now let's talk about this thing with Merck. And I wanted to preface this segment explaining those details to you, that people have personal preference and they have doctor's instruction. If you go to the doctor says, this is what I want for you. You can go get a second opinion. I think that's absolutely fine. But at a certain point, when your doctor says, here's your prescription, you say, okay, doc. Now we can take a look at what's going on with molnupiravir. And this story is really serious. We had a good question last night on Timcast IRL when we were talking about this. Why is this story in the New York Times? Why would they be running a story saying that this pill could insert mutations or errors? It could insert errors into sperm or fetuses in children, resulting in mutations. The reason this is asked is like, what's the upside for the New York Times? Did someone seed this story to harm Merck? Could it be a rival of some sort? I don't trust these companies. Here's the story from the New York Times. A new COVID-19 pill from Merck has raised hopes that it could transform the landscape of treatment options for Americans at high risk of severe disease at a time when the Omicron variant of the coronavirus is driving a surge of cases in highly vaccinated European countries. But 2 weeks after the FDA expert committee narrowly voted to recommend authorizing the drug, known as molnupiravir. Okay, so I want to make sure I clarify that they voted to recommend the drug for approval. The FDA is still weighing Merck's application. Among the biggest questions facing regulators is whether the drug, in the course of wreaking havoc on the virus's genes, also has the potential to cause mutations in human DNA. Scientists are especially worried about pregnant women, they said, because the drug could affect a fetus's dividing cells, theoretically causing birth defects. Members of the FDA expert committee expressed those same concerns during a public meeting on November 30th. Quote, do we want to reduce the risk for the mother by 30% while exposing the embryo and fetus to a much higher risk of harm by this drug? Dr. James Hildreth, the president of Meharry Medical College in Tennessee, said in a meeting, my answer is no, and there is no circumstance in which I would advise a pregnant woman to take this drug. The FDA advisors also noted that the risk could extend to other patients, including men wanting to become fathers, though those risks remain poorly understood. And Merck said in its own studies have turned up no evidence that the drug causes DNA mutations. Now, why would I trust them? We need independent review. Crucially, molnupiravir is expected to work against Omicron, but it has drawn concern from some scientists and regulators in Europe for being less effective than certain other treatments. It has been shown to reduce the risk of hospitalization and death by 30% if given within 5 days of symptoms emerging. Here's what scientists know about how the drug works and its potential risks. When the drug is processed in the body, it creates compounds that closely resemble one of the building blocks of RNA, the genetic material inside the coronavirus. That causes problems for the coronavirus as it makes copies of itself. Once the virus enters a cell and starts replicating, the drug compound can slip into the virus's RNA and insert enough errors that the virus cannot survive. What molnupiravir does is it disguises itself. Elizabeth Campbell, an expert in structural biology at the Rockefeller University, who studies coronavirus antivirals, said in an interview, it can propagate errors that are going to be sprinkled all over the genome. Making more and more mistakes, the virus eventually grinds to a stop, Dr. Campbell said. That helps the body fight off the infection and potentially save the patient's life. The problem is that the same compound that interferes in the replication of the virus's genetic material can also be transformed into one that resembles a building block of DNA. Some scientists are concerned that could cause errors in a patient's own DNA or in that of a developing fetus. Quote, if cells are replicating, it means they're uptaking a version of one of the DNA building blocks derived from molnupiravir and incorporating it. How serious of a problem is that? A team of researchers at the University of North Carolina studied the use of molnupiravir in isolated hamster cells over 32 days and found the drug did induce mutations in DNA. Those mutations could contribute to the development of cancer or cause birth defects either in a developing fetus or through incorporation into sperm precursor cells. The drug targets only dividing cells, which are relatively sparse in an adult. That poses a narrower risk than other so-called mutagens like radiation, which can damage DNA in all types of cells. Still, Ronald Swanstrom, an HIV researcher at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, who helped lead the hamster cell study, said that adults had enough dividing cells in bones, for example, and in the lining of the gut to cause concern. He also noted that men were constantly making dividing sperm cells that could carry potential mutations. I don't think anybody knows what this dose means in terms of human outcomes. I hope it's trivial, but I don't think anybody knows. Now, I find this framing very interesting. They could have certainly headlined the article with Merck's new pill may cause mutations in fetuses or sperm cells, in males. I think both points are extremely important. Now, New York Times, they framed this as mostly an issue for pregnant women. But pregnant women aren't always pregnant. So I think it's important to let pregnant women know this could happen. But it's also important to note that men are always producing dividing sperm cells. So that's a more consistent issue. I think it's fair to say both men and women could be negatively impacted by this reproductive issue. But if the issue is that, men's sperm cells always are going to be impacted by this and pregnant women are going to be impacted when they're women are going to be impacted when they're pregnant, shouldn't they at least point out this is serious for all people? But it's fine. I'm not super, concerned about the framing of the article. I'm more concerned with the long-term health effects that we're going to need to study with pills like this. It could take decades to determine whether or not this stuff is safe. And it's a bummer. It really is. That we can't just make medicine. Now, there have been some rulings from judges on ivermectin about right to try laws. There are many doctors, and I think the FDA, ivermectin is not approved as a therapeutic or treatment for COVID. But of course, that hasn't stopped many people from advocating for it or from prescribing it. Now, in some key circumstances, there have been people who are dying. One story right now I was just reading is about a man's wife. She's intubated in an induced coma with a 30% chance of survival, and the husband demanded ivermectin, saying she's going to die. What's the harm? And apparently, a judge has ruled that it's a right to try laws. Give it a shot. Now, I think people should be able to choose what they want to do, but we need studies backing up and proving things, beyond just a few years. Now, interestingly, as I've stated, the FDA has not approved ivermectin. There are promising studies, however, and even the CDC says this. There are currently studies showing, prominent effects. For whatever reason, don't ask me. It's not approved. I don't know what their plan is for approval, and I think you should get your advice from your doctor. But ivermectin's been around for a really, really long time. So we know a bit more about the negative health consequences. The question that I think is really important for people who are proponents of ivermectin is, does it really work? Joe Rogan is adamant. My attitude is there's been a lot of interesting arguments as to why in certain countries we've seen it seemingly be effective, notably in Brazil and India. And I think a really good argument is that people in these places, and namely India, are known to have parasites. And ivermectin is a deworming agent, yes, for humans. And so if your immune system is compromised because of parasites and you take something that clears out parasites, your immune system can then shift its focus. It's a very great argument. I'm not going to pretend to know. I don't care to have arguments about the science because I'm not a scientist. I'm not doing research in these labs. What I can say is these pills from Merck, how are they going to just crank them out? The same is true for the mRNA vaccines. When people say that they're not confident, I say, okay, well, talk to your doctor. If you're not happy with the results you get from your doctor, get a second opinion. But I think it's fine if an individual says, I looked into this, and I have made a personal choice for myself. Personally, I always stress that I go to the doctors. They prescribe me something like flabaginazole or something, and I'm like, I have no idea what that is, and and then you just take it. I remember when I was skateboarding when I was a teenager, and I hurt my knee, and the doctor's like, here, take these pills, and I'm like, what are these pills? Like, I don't even know what these things are, and they were some kind of anti-inflammatory, I don't know, and but I didn't know what they were, and I'm just like, I trust you, doc. Even right now, there are people who are saying that if a doctor comes out and says ivermectin, they trust that, but they don't trust the likes of molnupiravir. Here's my question to proponents of either side. Why should I trust any of it? You know what I mean? I think there's a real tribal component as to why people are willing to choose to trust a certain medication. Brett Weinstein might come out and say, look at these studies on ivermectin. Well, there are studies on these other medications, and there are studies on the vaccines too. I don't understand how people on the left or the right are going to tell me that I should weigh on either of these studies when I'm not the researcher and I have no idea. I certainly think politics plays a role. I think corporate profit plays a role. And that's why ultimately I err kind of against the establishment and the massive multinational corporations, but I talk to my doctors, and I ultimately do what they advise me to do. And I had two doctors. One said, do nothing, and that was it. And the other said, we want to get you monoclonal antibodies. And I said, okay, that is considered, that is an emergency use authorization treatment. Here's what we want. I want to read a little bit more. They go on to say, Ronald Swanstrom, the HIV researcher, says, human bones, we read this. I don't think anybody knows what this dose means in terms of human outcomes. I hope it's trivial, but I don't think anybody knows. In a letter objecting to Dr. Swanstrom's conclusions, Merck scientists said that hamster cells were exposed to the drug for considerably longer than COVID patients would be. The company said that it tested the drug in rodents and found no signs of DNA mutations. They go on to mention that there is a potential risk in pregnancy. Cells in fetuses are dividing all the time, heightening the risk of mutations. As a result, Merck excluded pregnant and breastfeeding women, as well as women likely to become pregnant for its clinical trial. But what about men and their sperm cells? You see, this is very difficult to ascertain, to figure out what makes sense. Now, when you cover stories like this, I run the risk of YouTube coming down and bashing my channel for simply pointing out these risks exist. So what do? I'll tell you one thing that's difficult. I do not know of in any study risks from ivermectin. I also am personally not convinced it actually works. Could maybe be a placebo effect. There's been promising data, but I'm not going to pretend to be a medical doctor who can tell you what to believe or what I'm supposed to think about these things. I've heard the arguments. I've talked with Joe. I've seen the doctor's statements and the math protocol, all that stuff, and I'm just like, I think it's a big problem that we get wrapped up in arguing, science and medical results instead of just saying we are free individuals to choose as we see fit. So I think it's a problem when YouTube censors people. I think it's an issue when they want to have mandates. Look at this one. Kathy Hochul admits her controversial mask mandate didn't make a difference in New York City. I think this is a little falsely framed. What she was saying is that her controversial mask mandate didn't matter because New York City is under extreme lockdown. She certainly thinks that masks work. But I think we have a problem. We've got cities that are playing politics. Here's where we should be, okay? In my opinion, I'm not going to argue medicine. The left is the establishment. They love vaccines. They love mRNA. They want to get their boosters. That's great, man. Do your thing. If somebody tells me they want to go to the doctor and get a certain medication, I'm like, that's your life, bro. I can't tell you efficacy. I can read the studies. You got studies saying masks works. You got studies saying that vaccines, that the mRNA vaccines work, but the efficacy has been waning, or it could be the new variants, aren't working for the vaccines, whatever. I don't know how to argue that stuff because it's really, really simple. I can tell you something. When it comes to the media, when it comes to the internal workings of these massive corporations, I have personally experienced their motives, their desires, their drive, and their lies. So that makes me a little bit more of an expert. I can tell you exactly what it was like. I read a lot of news. I can tell you a bit about what happened according to multiple reports. What I can't do is tell you what medications do, what the studies say, because that's not part of my wheelhouse. But the same is true for the left and the establishment. When they come out and they say, we know this, we know that, trust the science. Okay, well, we got science saying that this Merck pill is bad. It can mutate DNA. Which science am I supposed to trust? The science that Pfizer hasn't released? Look, I'm not going to get into arguing medical stuff because I would be arguing from a point of ignorance. I can read studies, but there's so many. What I can do is argue from a point of freedom. And I think this is what y'all should be doing too. Because the left, the establishment, whatever, they'll come out and say the vaccines work. And you can respond very simply with, yeah, all right. I'm glad you think that way. I'm glad you're doing what's right for you. I'm glad you're advocating for what you think is best. But people have a right to live their lives, to pursue happiness, and to be free from forced medical procedures. That's just it. The government shouldn't be allowed, in my opinion, the government shouldn't be involved in private medical decisions. Now, I suppose the challenge is for pro-lifers, the left says, you're being inconsistent, but I'm sure you have those arguments. Mine is fairly consistent in that regard. I don't like the idea that someone would go to the doctor would make a recommendation, and then you got to get some kind of government approval, or there'd be a law to a certain degree. Now, that being said, this goes way, way beyond, and it becomes an impossible conversation. It really, really does, because everyone's willing to accept certain limitations on what doctors can and can't do, except in certain areas. Even the left would come out and tell you, the government shouldn't be involved in private medical decisions. And it's like, okay, what if a doctor recommends like chopping off your leg above the knee because you have a cold? Oh, well, that's malpractice. Okay, well, tell me where the line is. You see, this for me is ultimately the issue. We do accept limitations on what doctors can and can't prescribe, on what they can give you and how they can give it to you. It's literally why they have prescription pads, because we don't want doctors just giving out bunk BS. It's why pharmacists can intervene. And it's why you can sue for malpractice, and it's why some doctors can go to jail. It's why there was a debate over euthanasia. It's not so simple to say that you would just say the government can't be involved in private medical decisions. I've said that. When it comes to, life versus choice, abortion versus pro-life. But I think it's fair to point out, we all need to recognize the limitations of our personal morality. That if you go to if you have a doctor who's like, I've decided that because you have a cold, I'm going to prescribe sterilization. We'd freak out over that. We'd be like, the government should stop that. So where's the line, man? If when it comes to leftist ideology, if medical doctors were prescribing things based on race, the left would be like, this is wrong. If doctors would deny someone gender-affirming care, the left would freak out. No, I thought you got to trust your doctors. You see, therein lies the big challenge. Our morality has limits. Or I should say our principles have limits. We can talk all day and night about how we try to be consistent, but the reality is I don't think anybody can be, because everybody's got their moral limits. So I'll stress this point again, and I'll be self-critical on it. When it comes to the issue of like pro-choice, I'm like, I don't like the idea that a woman goes to the doctor. She may have a very serious issue, and the doctor's like, well, I've got to get approval before I can, provide this medical treatment. And I'm talking specifically about, I'm not talking about abortion as contraception. I'm talking about a woman going to the doctor, and the doctor's like, it's, an ectopic pregnancy or whatever. It's going to kill you and the baby. We need to act fast. And then it's like, but let's make sure we're following government procedure and we're getting some kind of approval. And I don't like the idea of the government saying, we get your private records. You have to provide proof of vaccination for this, that, or otherwise. I don't like any of those ideas. However, doctors can't just give you insane treatments. A doctor can't prescribe he's going to, spray you with liquid nitrogen in the face or something. I mean, I suppose there's great discretion at to which a doctor can do, but doctors can be sued for malpractice, and doctors can go to prison if they violate laws. So the government is already in that room to a great degree. It's why there is a prescription pad, because the government is saying, if you want to do something, the doctor has to sign off on it, and that has to be provided to someone as proof before you can receive that treatment. So where's the line? People need to recognize this stuff. I've talked about this in other issues too with Ian brought it up on Timcast.IRL. He said, you're saying no lockdowns because COVID, is bad, but it's not airborne Ebola. So he was like, so what if it was Ebola? Would you then be like, okay, people can have their freedoms taken away? And I'm like, that's a great point. It's a great point. How many people right now who are like, who believe COVID isn't that bad and we shouldn't be locked down would be calling for lockdowns if it was an airborne Ebola liquefying people's insides and they were vomiting black goo? A lot more people. So the issue just becomes personal limits and morality. And I think, with each human being somewhat different and where they stand, you end up just with political factions based on the limits they're willing to accept. I don't have all the answers. I think we should be arguing from a freedom standpoint. And that's our best option. I can certainly say, you want to tell me to trust the science? Merck's pill. You've got these people saying these things about it. How long until that gets banned? How long until they say you can't disparage the Merck pill? Because you can't speak ill of the vaccines for the most part. Yeah. I'll leave it there. All right. These are big philosophical debates, questions, but I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.